Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most magnificent, compassionate, and merciful. Assalamu alaikum, greetings of peace and good evening to everyone who's watching this program live on Facebook. We appreciate your presence and your time that you've committed to us. My name is Afaf Nasher. I'm the Executive Director for CAIR New York, and I also happen to be a proud board member of AMAL, the Association of Muslim American Lawyers, a bar association that Muslims participate in and congregate in to not only learn from one another, but also to discuss important issues such as this. And the topic we have for you today is qualified immunity. And I'm very proud to be the one who is able to give you a brief introduction to our speakers who are going to be talking about this. And so you will see on your screen that we have, mashallah, a very distinguished panel. I'll start with Senator Parker. So Senator Kevin Parker is, of course, a state senator from New York in the 21st Senatorial District in Brooklyn. He's a lifelong Brooklyn resident himself, a Flatbush resident for more than 31 years. So when he represents people, it's because he's representing his home and his community, mashallah. He's intimately familiar with the needs of the 21st District, which consists, of course, of many diverse communities. He's a product of the New York City public school system himself. He attended PS 193, IS 240, Midwood High School. And Senator Parker's professional background really reflects a wide range of his public service and his unwavering commitment to a better New York. As the special assistant to former New York State Comptroller H. Carl McCall, Senator Parker managed intergovernmental relations in New York City, and he was the liaison between the comptroller, city, state, federal elected officials. And before he took office, Senator Parker was a New York City Urban Fellow and served as a special assistant to former Manhattan Borough President Ruth Messenger. And a legislative aide to former New York City Council member Una Clark and special assistant to Assemblyman Nick Perry. He was also project manager with the New York State Urban Development Corporation. And Senator Parker financed minority and women-owned businesses and promoted community businesses and development. So as our senator, he's been working on a wide range of issues. And as you can tell, really, I invite those to go to the website where you can find Senator Kevin Parker's full bio, in which he talks about the legislative items and all the different committees that he's been working on to better our community here in Brooklyn, New York. Among them, of course, Senator Parker's commitment is, his entire commitment is reflected to his leadership in civic organizations, because he did form the New York Ready Emergency Preparedness Unit alongside other community leaders. He's the former second vice chairman of the board and chairperson of Community Board 17 Education Committee. And it just goes on and on. Senator Parker, you'll forgive me if I don't read all of it, but the truth is you've got quite a few accomplishments, and I invite those to visit your website and to learn of them. And we'll be hearing from Senator Parker, which I think is more important than hearing from me. And then of course we have our friend and our brother and fellow attorney, Lonnie Hart. Lonnie Hart Jr. is a native of Brooklyn as well. He graduated from Rutgers University with a Bachelor's of Arts degree and attended Howard University School of Law, which of course is one of the nation's prominent historically Black colleges and university. Mr. Hart was employed as an assistant district attorney in the Kings County District Attorney's Office from 1998 to 2002. And during his time as an assistant district attorney, Mr. Hart prosecuted hundreds of misdemeanor and felony cases, ranging from assault to drug cases to homicides, from arrests to trial and convictions. As part of his responsibility, Mr. Hart indicted hundreds of cases in the Kings County grand jury and investigated dozens of high-profile violent crimes. In 2002, Mr. Hart entered private practice, focusing now on criminal defense. So he jumped and switched sides. And he also practices police misconduct, which of course is really relevant to today's discussion. Mr. Hart has successfully represented clients in the Bronx, Queens, Manhattan, Nassau, Suffolk, and Westchester counties, and he represents clients in federal court, specifically the Eastern and Southern districts of New York, in both criminal and civil matters. I invite all of you to please, he does have much more to his bio as well. Visit his website and learn more about him and his fantastic work as an attorney. And of course, I have my fellow board member, which I'm very proud to introduce as well. So Brother Mustapha Ndanusa, he is not just a board member for ML, but he's an attorney in his own right. And he's a founding partner of Davis Ndanusa Ikhlas and Salim LLP. Brother Mustapha is a litigation attorney with over 10 years of state and federal litigation experience. He began his career with MFY Legal Services, which is a nonprofit organization. And then he enhanced his litigation and advocacy skills there while always being intent on being a trial attorney. So he left there, and now he practices a whole host and range of advocacy, including housing, advocacy in criminal laws, and civil litigation, as well as federal action involving police misconduct, such as false arrests, false imprisonment, and assaults. Again, very relevant to today's discussion. Just like everyone else, my brother Mustapha has a wide range of accomplishments that I invite everyone to visit their websites. You'll all please excuse me. I know that there's more to say about you, but we'd really like to get to the topic at heart, which is something that's so pressing, especially considering the context of today and what we see, and this issue of qualified immunity as it relates to police misconduct and what we can do about it as people who understand the law, either as writers of the law, like Mr. Parker, or as those who have to incorporate it in our litigation. So I thank you all once again, and I thank our audience, and I'd like to begin the discussion and hand it over to my brother Mustapha, who will be moderator, who will also go further into the topic, and then bring in our two esteemed speakers as well. Brother Mustapha.
Thank you, Sister Afaf. Bismillah. As Sister Afaf mentioned, my name is Mustapha Ndanusa, and I'm one of the board members of AMAL. So unless you've been living on another planet, you are very much aware that the world has been ravaged by COVID-19, and the world essentially came to a standstill abruptly. In the same manner, the world also came to an abrupt protest after we learned about the horrific death and murder of George Floyd. And what ensued after that was demands by the public, by everyone that has been protesting, everyone involved, asking for a reformation, transformation of our policing system, and also a reformation or transformation of our criminal justice system. In New York, the state where I reside in, I don't know where everybody else is, but definitely in New York, one of the areas that was tackled was the repealing of Section 50A of the New York State Civil Rights Law. That particular section was a section that shielded police records of misconduct from public eye. That has since been repealed, and now the public is able to see such records. And tonight we're going to be talking about another area of the civil rights law that is going to be impacted in the sense of qualified immunity, which Senator Parker, who is joining us today, will talk more about that. So what we want to do today, as Sister Afaf mentioned, is talk about qualified immunity. But before I turn it over to Senator Parker and Lonnie Hart, who is joining us today, I want to just have a brief discussion about the history of qualified immunity. In other words, how did we get here? And to find out a little bit more about qualified immunity, I want to take you back to 1871. Yes, we have to go way back in time. So in 1871, the president then was Ulysses S. Grant. He took over after the assassination of President Lincoln. The African Americans that were slaves here had been recently freed. And after their freedom, there was a spate of violence by the KKK. And there was also a spate of disenfranchisement of African Americans and newly freed slaves in manners that included violation of their civil rights, violation of their voting rights, and all other manners of things. And what Ulysses S. Grant needed was the power to be able to engage the states, the power to be able to stop the states from infringing on these civil rights. So he petitioned Congress to pass the Enforcement Act. And the third of the Enforcement Act is what is relevant to our discussion today. And the third of the Enforcement Act, which was originally the KKK Act, Ulysses S. Grant was empowered with suspending habeas corpus. He could literally just take somebody off the streets, accuse them, and hold them. And for those who are lawyers here, I'm not going to get into it, but you know what that means if there's a suspension of habeas corpus. In the Enforcement Act was also a provision that allowed individuals, private citizens, to be able to sue state actors, state agencies, agents like the police, like the commissioners of different agencies in states, like correction officers, all different types of state agents could be sued on the federal level. The Enforcement Act was then amended and it was codified as 42 USC 1983. So this is where we get the famous 1983 cases. That's where it comes from the 42nd Congress, section 1983. So the portion of the Enforcement Act that was codified in 1983 that's relevant to our discussion today was a provision that allows private citizens, as I mentioned earlier, to be able to sue state actors for violation of their constitutional rights, their civil rights, their privileges and immunities. So from 1871 until 1967, there was no such thing as qualified immunity. So if an individual sued a state actor or state agency, no agency was able to assert qualified immunity as a defense until 1967. In 1967, in the case of Pearson versus Ray, the Supreme Court for the first time allowed the defense of qualified immunity. And what's interesting about that is 1967, we just go back, wasn't that far away. This is right in the heart of the civil rights movement. Qualified immunity allows state actors to be able to ward off liability if they are able to demonstrate that they were acting in their capacity as a state actor and that the violation of the civil rights was not a clearly established right. And I think Lonnie Hart would speak to that particular issue a little bit later. So after Pearson versus Ray, the Supreme Court basically doubled down and allowed qualified immunity to be extended into areas beyond just false arrest and false imprisonment. It could be used in any action against any state actor. In Harlow versus Fitzgerald, the Supreme Court then allowed qualified immunity to become an objective standard, which made it even more difficult to be able to beat qualified immunity when it is asserted. So where are we today? Today, we have the call for the end of qualified immunity. We have Senator or Representative Justin Amash and Ayanna Presley calling for an end to qualified immunity by presenting a bill to end qualified immunity at the federal level. And we have with us today Senator Parker, who will be talking about the ending of qualified immunity at the state level. And we also have Justice Sotomayor and Justice Clarence Thomas also calling for the end of qualified immunity. And that by itself really speaks volumes about how much we need to question or get rid of qualified immunity when you have two justices that sit on the Supreme Court on opposite ends of the spectrum legally, both of them agreeing on one thing, which is that qualified immunity should come to an end. So with that, I want to turn it now to Lonnie Hart. And Lonnie, if you can sort of just tell us a little bit about the practical implications of qualified immunity when it affects people that are trying to seek redress for a constitutional violation. Lonnie?
Yes, thank you. First of all, good evening, everyone. And I'd like to thank you for the invitation tonight. My basic training is in criminal law. As stated earlier, I am a criminal defense attorney and have been for 18 years now. Through my criminal defense practice, when I represent a client and when I'm fortunate enough to be able to get their cases dismissed, at that point, I will see if we can pursue a civil suit for false arrest, false imprisonment. Was there any other type of police misconduct, some type of police brutality that a client can then perhaps get a money judgment from. What I find in my practice is that, first of all, you need to temper expectations with your clients in terms of what they think they may be able to receive. I think there is a false narrative out there, or people only see that these multi-million-dollar judgments, but they don't realize that most of those people have been incarcerated for 10, 15, 20 years, and then they're exonerated and released. And those are the cases that obviously go into the millions of dollars in terms of settlement with the city. The average case is not like that. What I find is that false arrests and false imprisonment cases are much more difficult to prove than the average layperson would suspect. Just because your criminal case was dismissed does not necessarily mean in federal court or even state court that you were falsely arrested. That's where some of the qualified immunity implications come into play. In my practice, and I'm thinking of two particular cases in particular, it's more difficult to prove that someone has been falsely arrested, number one, if there was a complainant/victim on the original case. And how that's impacted is, for example, if someone files a complaint against someone else and say they committed a crime against me, qualified immunity really releases police officers from really doing any type of an investigation whatsoever. They are not required to investigate the credibility of that witness, to investigate whether that witness and the defendant have any other type of prior relationship. So what you'll find is that when you go to court, and like I said, federal and state courts they operate differently. State court, as you can assume, thousands of cases, hundreds of lawyers, all in the same room. Federal court is different in the sense that when you have conference with the judge, it's the judge, the adversary, the city, and yourself. And you have to be prepared to make certain arguments to that judge to even convince them that your case has merit. The qualified immunity is used by the attorneys for the city, I would say, as a sledgehammer to get many cases dismissed. Okay. It ties together when you talk about probable cause for someone to actually be arrested for a crime, and then qualified immunity. The qualified immunity standard is so low, it's basically what any reasonable officer behavior may have been in that particular moment in time. It's such a low standard that I've had cases where, again, the officer or detective did no investigation whatsoever. I've had an instance of where I had a client who was arrested, but a witness named another person who actually committed the crime. The detective did not follow that up whatsoever, but that was yet deemed reasonable by a judge, and the case was summarily dismissed because of it. So it is an extremely difficult mountain to climb to get past the qualified immunity. Now, we won't even get into the absolute immunity that is enjoyed by prosecutors, right? So when you mix the two of those together, there is literally no accountability whatsoever for the police and for prosecutors who are prosecuting cases. Therefore, again, it's very, very difficult. It's a high mountain to climb in order for a client to receive any type of money judgment related to a false arrest or a false imprisonment. I think the better cases, so to speak, are cases where there may have been some police brutality. The reason for that is you will have medical records. You can have photographs, okay? You can have some type of physical evidence that demonstrates that this police officer violated the civil rights of this particular defendant. And even if the arrest is justified, you can still perhaps recover due to the brutality aspect of the arrest. So again, the qualified immunity, again, the standard is so low that any police officer, detective doing the bare minimum will not be held accountable for their actions should you find out later on that the defendant is not guilty or did not commit the crime at all.
So thank you, Lonnie, for those statements. Senator Parker, we've heard from Lonnie Hart describing basically this low standard of qualified immunity at the federal level and how difficult or how big of a mountain it is to climb to try to seek redress for litigants. Can you speak briefly on what you are trying to do to sort of be able to help litigants so that this mountain is basically lowered, or maybe there's no mountain at all?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, let me say salam alaikum to everyone, and in advance, let me say Eid Ud Adha Mubarak to everyone as Eid is coming upon us, at the end of the week. And let me just acknowledge my attorney, Lonnie Hart. Y'all would not be calling me Senator Parker if it wasn't for that brother and the fine, legal work that he did on my behalf. I think twice, in fact. And so, I'm not just a member. I'm a client, and certainly, a living testament to the work that brother does and how well he knows the law. And let me just put a little bit simply, as I tell everybody all the time, I'm not an attorney. I just play one in Albany as we make the law here around various issues. And this is one in which, the long story short, as you heard Lonnie indicate, essentially, if a cop does something wrong to you, you have right now no recourse, or very little recourse on state court to get anything done. You really need to go to the federal court to really get the kind of redress that you need to get in terms of that person acting wrongfully in the context of their job, right? If they've done something criminal, you might be able to get that resolved. And then, we've had actually a number of laws that have been standing in place, including 50A, lack of a special prosecutor, and then qualified immunity, which essentially has all been bricks in a wall to obfuscate not just justice, but just basic transparency and accountability by police officers around the state of New York. And so I put in a bill that's S8619. There's a companion bill being carried by Assemblywoman Latrice Walker, also from Brooklyn, a jurist as well. And this bill, based on a law that they did in California, would essentially create a private right of action for folks in order to allow them to go to state court and really kind of trying to kind of funnel people to state court instead of them having to go to federal court to try to get this resolved. And again, that's been problematic within the context of, notwithstanding the statements by Judge Sotomayor and Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court has really shown no interest in really addressing the issues around qualified immunity. And so really without that, there's been really, again, no way to create any accountability for these police officers. And so my bill, again, allows that and creates a pathway for people to seek justice in the state courts.
So, thank you, Senator. So can you maybe give us a little bit of insight on what led you to this particular topic? Right, there are a lot of different topics that maybe you could have tried to tackle during this Black Lives Matter movement world that we live in. What led you to this particular topic?
Well, again, I'm gonna go back to why Lonnie had to be my lawyer. Like, I've had my own, like, I'm a Black man in America like everybody else, right? And so the title doesn't shield you, right? So people come in here and they're like, oh, Senator Parker. And many times people will think that being a state senator, and you would think or maybe assume that being a state senator would shield you from some of the inappropriate behavior of law enforcement and others, and it actually doesn't. And it didn't for me in a number of cases. And particularly when you have, imagine having a Trump-like figure in the mayoralty, which is what we had when we had Michael Bloomberg as the mayor. And essentially Michael Bloomberg sicked the cops on me. And in order to kind of criminalize me because I was blocking things in the state legislature that he wanted that I thought was bad for my constituency, right? And so his attempt was to criminalize me on various things. And that really brought to light for me the need for police reform. And so the state of New York was actually the first state in the country to actually do a comprehensive package of police reforms, now almost 2 months ago. And we did 10 bills. 4 of them got passed under my name. 2 others I wrote the original drafts for. So you may hear about people talking about 50A, which, the repeal of 50A, right, which would allow the use of the personnel records of bad cops in prosecution. I wrote the very first draft of any version of 50A in the state of New York. I also wrote one of the first drafts of the special prosecutor bill. And both those bills eventually got passed under the chair of our codes committee, Jamal Bailey, who's again a great jurist and a fantastic senator from the Bronx. But I passed 4 other bills, including the 911 false reporting bill, a bill that creates a office in the Attorney General's office around police misconduct, the Right to Record Act, as well as body cams for state police officers, right? And so like this work around transparency and accountability in the context of police reform is not a, Black Lives Matter, oh, we should do this thing. Those bills, I had them sitting in the pocket for 10 years. I've been waiting for this moment. So thank you to the protesters. Thank you to the folks who are involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. But people like myself and attorneys like Lonnie, Hart have been on the front lines of this fight really literally for decades, right? And glad that we finally got to that place. And so as we started to pass that legislation, I then was engaging with people and talking to folks about kind of what is the next step, what is the next level of things that need to be done. And we put together a number of bills that we thought were important. One of them is creating a non-police response to mental health, homelessness, and substance abuse calls that we think is important. Another bill that creates New York City residency requirements for New York City police officers, right? Another one, Lonnie, you'll like this one, is a kind of a CLE for police officers, that essentially a law that says that you have to have continued legal education for police officers, right? As opposed to just going through the stuff one time for 6 months and right. Then that's it, right? And so one of the bills that we put as we started developing that package of bills was qualified immunity and eliminating it. And like I said, Colorado had done it. And so we really just used that model as the way that we would amend the law to allow people a private right of action in cases in which the police officers acted improperly.
Thank you again, Senator. And we hope that many of the other things you have in your back pocket can come to fruition at some point.
Let's get to the pocket.
So Lonnie, I find your sort of history really instructive and very interesting, because you were a prosecutor at one point. So you got to see the world from one particular perspective, where the police officer, in essence, were your friends. They were going to be your witnesses. They would testify in certain cases. And now you're the one that's on the other side suing police officers for misconduct. So the senator just spoke about how sometimes it's all about timing, to get things done. What I want to ask you about is the timing of qualified immunity. Obviously, I assume that in litigation, qualified immunity is something that has to be preserved in your answer. But at what point does it become an issue? Is it something that becomes an issue at summary judgment, motion to dismiss, trial? Can you tell us a little bit more about at what time does qualified immunity become impactive in a particular case?
Yeah, qualified immunity, especially again in the federal cases that I've done, it comes to fruition very early on in the form of a summary judgment motion by the city. I alluded to earlier, it's kind of a, I call it like a hammer that the attorneys for the city uses in pretty much each and every case. It's obviously most cost effective for them to get rid of cases as early in the process as possible. When you practice in the federal courts, and again, when you meet with a federal judge, they have reviewed your complaint. They are asking you questions as to each and every allegation or count, so to speak, that you allege in your complaint. And they want answers as to how you believe that you can prove these certain allegations, false arrest, false imprisonment, emotional infliction of emotional distress. They want to know how you intend to prove that, and they want to know right then and there. Mm-hmm. So when you have those instances again where it's a false arrest case, false imprisonment, and the city believes that the arrest, there was probable cause for that arrest, they're going to use that and use qualified immunity as early on in the process as possible. And they're going to file what's called a summary judgment motion to seek to have the case dismissed.
So on that issue, can you also tell us a little bit about the interconnection between qualified immunity and probable cause, or clearly established rights? I saw a video not too long ago that my paralegal sent to me. It's a sort of tongue-in-cheek mockery of the whole qualified immunity. And a guy, a police officer, a mock police officer slaps a person, and the person is like, "Oh, did you see what he did?" So, well, was he punished for that before? It's like, no, he wasn't. Well, then it's okay, it's legal. And then it slaps the person again. It says, well, did you see what he just did? He's like, yeah, I saw what he did. Well, was he punished for that before? No, he wasn't. Well, then it's legal. So can you speak a little bit about the whole clearly established constitutional rights and probable cause, and how that's connected to qualified immunity, and why that's so impactful?
Well, so you had run down some of the history of qualified immunity earlier. So based upon the history of qualified immunity, each litigant that comes before the court has to show that this police officer violated what you said, like a clearly established right. But unfortunately, there is no case law or to speak of, or there is no background. So in the example that you gave of the in the video that you saw, so if a litigant comes before a court and says, hey, he slapped me, and the court is going to ask, well, has it previously been a clearly established right that a police officer is not to slap you? And if the answer is no, then your case can get dismissed. Okay, so that's kind of how the qualified immunity works. Now, they will give more consideration, if it's a Fourth Amendment issue, if it's a search or seizure issue. But again, it all kind of ties into, like I said, clearly established rights, along with the probable cause to arrest. Okay, and if that probable cause is established, then that officer is going to be granted that qualified immunity.
Wait, when you say when probable cause is established, or when there is no probable cause? So,
well,
so you're saying that if they were to establish that there was probable cause, then qualified immunity is automatic?
Practically, yes. Probably automatic at that point, yes. Unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. So, Senator Parker, I wanted to maybe get a sense from you on what support you have gotten for this bill, and what pushback, if any, you have gotten from this bill.
Well, we've just actually introduced the bill about 6 weeks ago. We're not really in legislative session as of now, and so the normal kind of processes aren't necessarily going on. And so we're right now still building support. I know there's a lot of folks who support it. There's a group of activists from Freedom March NYC who I know support it, and I've talked to them about the bill. The ACLU I know support it, and so and from you, I'm now found out that some Supreme Court justices support it. But I know that there is actually some wide range of support in my conference, including again Senator Jamal Bailey and Senator Zelno Myrie, who actually have their own version of qualified immunity as well. And so it's a conversation here. The question is, when can we take up some more police reform bills in the state legislature? Hopefully we'll be able to do it sooner than later. But by the likelihood is that we probably will start taking some of this stuff up early next year when we go back into the full legislative session.
So in this conversations you're continuing to have, and the support you're getting from the ACLU and the different maybe not-for-profits, have you sort of thought about how you can maybe rewrite or redefine certain aspects of the bill, whether there's any consideration for that, or is this pretty much what you have now?
No. I mean, the bill's not written in stone. It's only a piece of paper. All right. In fact, I have a copy of it right here. Right. It's it's only in paper. So we can, if people out there have questions, concerns, ways that we can improve the bill, make it stronger, make it tighter, I'm very open to that. My legislative director, who's been leading the charge on this, is Aaron Clark. And so people should reach out to my office and speak to Aaron and continue to work on it. We want the strongest bill possible, and we want something that we think is really going to work for the people here in the state of New York. But make no mistake, the police are not going to go quietly into the night. Yeah. They like the lack of transparency. They like the lack of accountability, and they're gonna and people who support white supremacy in the state also like it. And so people who've been able to use the police against African Americans, Latinos, Asians, Muslims, right, gay, lesbians, trans community, the people who've been doing that, they like it the way it is. And so there are people who are going to oppose it. And don't think about them as necessarily being Trump Republicans either. There's some Democrats, who are gonna oppose this as well. And so we really must work together and push hard. It's going to take a lot to get this law changed, because this is a game changer, right? Qualifying immunity from the perspective of creating accountability and transparency in terms of police in the state of New York is literally a game changer. And the likelihood, unless we get something really dramatic in November and we take over the Senate and get a new president, the likelihood is that we're not going to see a federal bill anytime soon.
So the final question for Lonnie, and then we're going to open it up to the rest of the board and anyone else that's joining us. You can send your questions through the chat. So Lonnie, I think you've had an opportunity to read Senator Parker's proposed bill. Do you think the way it is now, does it empower litigants, attorneys for litigants like yourself, in terms of being able to find redress for your clients? And if this bill is passed, how impactful would that be on your ability to prosecute cases?
Well, the bill as it stands right now, and like I said, we know it's a living document, so it can be changed. I think it really can impact a litigant's opportunity for redress in the courts, because again, a lot of cases that are, in my opinion, have merit are basically stopped in their tracks because of the low standard that the police have to adhere to. So if a bill like this could actually be passed, in my opinion, any time that you have increased accountability for police officers, for prosecutors, that's a good thing. Okay, and I think that there are some progressive prosecutors in the state of New York and that are being elected, around the country, that can hopefully take up the mantle of accountability for their own offices, as well as for the police officers that they work with. Bottom line, elections matter, right? So we know that the current president has put 200 federal judges into the rotation, so to speak, now, and these are the Trump Republicans who are going to be interpreting the laws for the next God knows how long, right? Because they're lifetime appointments. So elections do matter, and if we are concerned about how the courts are going to interpret a bill like Senator Parker's bill, then we have to elect the right candidates and make sure that they are going to address the needs of our community.
So thank you again, Lonnie and Senator Parker. At this point, we want to open it up to the rest of the board and people from the community to see if there are any other questions for our two guests. We can't hear you, Mustapha, if you're talking.
Yep, there we go. So I just want to thank our speakers again for addressing these issues and really educating us. We do have some questions that came in through Facebook, which I'll be happy to submit to all of you. But before I do, I also want to introduce Brother Ali Haq, who's also a board member with ML, and perhaps he wanted to comment or ask a question. Brother Ali, if you're there and you'd like to ask anything, please feel free to do so.
No, please proceed. I'm interested to hear what our audience members have to say.
Okay, fantastic. So our first question that came in from the audience is, how do you all think the police union will react to these new guidelines if passed? And I smile, and you're smiling too, because we know the answer to that. Who wants to take that one?
mean, I'll take it. I mean, look, the police union is going to be against anything other than the status quo, right? They like the status quo because, again, there's lack of transparency, lack of accountability, and their members can still go on and behave poorly and, do things that are, amoral and illegal and without any redress, right? And so they're going to continue to be against it. I don't think it really matters. I don't think that the police union per se, people focus on the police union, but it's not really the police union, right? It's really just a lot of regular, white people who are standing up for white privilege and white supremacy. And they help elect people and they put pressure on legislators, and you get pushback from people who just don't want to change things because they're scared of the white people who are complaining. Because they don't want to see Blacks or Latinos or Asians or, Muslims or transgender people. They don't want to see anybody other than straight white people get rights. And it just is what it is. And we have to just fight against it. And it's going to take us to continue, to being constantly vigilant to make sure that legislation and other things that are important out there around police reform get done.
Well, let me have a follow-up to that question. And I think, Brother Lonnie, maybe you would comment too, because you've been on the other side in which you've relied on police to be witnesses for you when you were a prosecutor, right? So I know I've heard the argument, for example, that with these reforms that are changing, with qualified immunity, we are essentially dispowering the police to be able to do their job. In other words, and I've heard this time and time again, that officers will almost be afraid to act and thus make the public less safe because of these laws that are opposed to them being able to do their job. How would you react to that?
Well, I've had this conversation before, and I've said it this way. When we say Black Lives Matter, I think that some people have the mistaken impression that we somehow are advocating lawlessness, and we're not, right? If someone commits a crime, they should be arrested and let the system work as it's designed to work, or supposed to work. I'm sorry, not designed, but as it's supposed to work, okay? But like, so when someone commits a crime, if they're arrested, but a mere arrest should not result in the death of a person, okay? The police should not be afraid to arrest someone, okay, who commits a crime, right? There's no need, or it's not necessary to kneel on a person's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds until the life is drained out of them. That is not necessary. And if a police officer feels they can't do their job without committing those acts of violence, then they probably don't need to be wearing the uniform.
So I'll go on to our next question, and I'll give it to anyone here who wants to take it on. Our next question is, do you feel that cases that could have been won by the complaint will be re-examined if any or all of these bills pass? Does that question make sense to you?
Yeah, I think the short answer is no. The short answer is no. I mean, there's no, I don't think there's going to be any type of, grandfather clause or anything, relating back. So if these bills were to pass, hopefully, it'll start from that point. Also, you have to be cognizant and aware, again, when I say elections matter, and what judges are going to be interpreting a new law related to whether it's 50A or whether it's related to qualified immunity. Are we going to expand it to the absolute immunity enjoyed by prosecutors? But there's going to be a judge somewhere with some political leanings, left or right, who is going to, at some point, interpret these laws.
Okay, and I think you hit the next question, which transitions perfectly, and that is, somebody asked, what? Absolute immunity for prosecutors? What's that? Because we've been hearing a lot about law enforcement. We really haven't heard the flip side of that and the protections that prosecutors have. And I think, Senator Parker, this is for you, because the question is there anything being discussed, proposed to counter prosecutorial immunity?
No, I think that we try to address the issue around prosecutors by breaking up the incestuous relationship between the police officers and prosecutors. You talked about it when you introduced Lonnie and the work that he's done in the Brooklyn DA's office. And look, I trust Eric Gonzalez in the Brooklyn DA. I even trust Darcel Clark in the Bronx. I'm not sure if I trust anybody else in the state, though, as it relates to their relationship with the police. And so with the special prosecutor bill that we passed, it does take these instances in which civilians are killed by the police to the Attorney General, so the Attorney General can prosecute them. I think that somewhat addresses it. Even if it doesn't, then I'm hoping that groups like this and people like Lonnie and Mustapha and yourself will give me some direction about what we need to do around absolute immunity for prosecutors.
Well, a part of that, I think, as at least from my background, especially with CAIR-NY, because we are an advocacy organization, is educating the public on what this bill is and what it does. So I would propose, Senator Parker, that perhaps your team can work on easy to understand informational pamphlets or whatever it is that we can help to distribute and bring out into the community, because ultimately you're going to look for a swell of support from grassroots organizations, but also from the general public, so that they could call your colleagues and make sure that you get the support you need.
Right, absolutely. And by the way, last year, actually 2 years ago, we actually passed it was a bill by Senator Nick Perry that is a prosecutorial review board that actually, a misconduct board that actually looks at prosecutory misconduct. We're one of the few states in the country that has it. And so we have actually already started looking at prosecutory misconduct, and so which may not in fact fit under all of the things that you're talking about, because if you by definition have absolute immunity, the question about whether what's misconduct can be a question. So we'll look at that. But this on the second issue, you're right. I'll definitely put out some information that people can understand around qualified immunity.
Brother Ali had a question. Maybe he'd like to ask it himself. I know he put it in the chat. Brother Ali, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Thanks, Afaf. Thank you, guy. Thank you to our speakers for coming out tonight and educating us on the topic. My question is for Senator Parker. A lot of Muslim organizations, and I'm part of one or two of them, are struggling with the question of what kind of relationships the Muslim organizations, should have with their local police precincts. How would you advise these Muslim organizations to proceed?
That's a really, really good question. And I've gotten involved in a lot of this work because, in my district, I represent the 21st district in Brooklyn, which is Flatbush and East Flatbush, Midwood, Ditmas Park, Windsor Terrace, and Park Slope.
I actually grew up in East Flatbush, actually. I mean, interestingly enough. So it was good to.
Okay, good.
I was there. I was born at between Newkirk and IUD.
Okay.
And I lived there for the first 13 years or so of my life. So it was really.
Well, we're neighbors, right? So I also represent part of Kensington. And in Kensington, we actually have the largest Pakistani community outside of Pakistan, probably in the world, but definitely in the United States. And so a lot of this work that I've gotten involved in became part of the work I was doing with that community. And then at one point, my legislative counsel was a brother who I think is on this call, Umir Khan, who's the director of policy now for the Attorney General, and a great jurist. And a lot of the bills that I'm talking about, he originally wrote some of those bills. And so although we're looking at this now in the context of Black Lives Matter, a lot of this legislation was actually conceived from the work that we were doing, trying to combat the fights that the NYPD were waging, or the war, I should say, the NYPD was waging against the Muslim communities. They were doing intelligence stuff in Jersey and all kinds of stuff. But anyway, so this all kind of, comes together. And so, I think that there's a couple of things. I always say that politics is a process, not an event. And so we have to stop thinking about politics as simply elections, even though I agree with Lonnie that elections matter, but we also got to be involved in the process of politics. And so people in communities have to join their community boards, but every police precinct has a police precinct council. I would tell you to join those police precinct councils as well. And that's a way for you to be engaged with what's happening in those precincts. I do also have a bill that I'm putting forward. This is actually an idea that came from our borough president in Brooklyn, Eric Adams, who spent 20 some odd years as a police officer and was a captain. He's actually the highest elected official. He's actually the highest ranking police officer to ever becoming an elected official in the state of New York, right? And so, Eric said to me that the most important person in the whole police department are the commanders of precincts. So we actually have put forward a bill, and I don't have the bill number offhand, but we put forward, I'll get it to you though. We put forward a bill that would actually create a democratic process around how those police commanders are picked at the precinct level. And so that it would be, some choices from the borough president's office, some people, some choices, some appointees, right? So each police precinct would have a board to help pick the commander, right? The borough president would be involved in that. The city council members would be involved in that. The community board would be involved in that. The police precinct council would be involved in that. And tenant leaders from NYCHA developments, they're directly involved with those police precincts, would also be involved in that. And as well as, obviously, the commissioner of the New York City Department of the NYPD, right? And so all of them would get together and make a decision, and so that there would be some accountability, because police commanders would not just simply be chosen by, randomly by one police plaza. They would have to go through this process with this board. I know others have, a couple of people have bills in that would actually make the NYPD commissioner actually elected as an elected official, in the city of New York. And so there's a number of kind of democratizing conversations being had about our police right now. And so these are a number of proposals that we should be considering and trying to figure out over the next several months about what we should do and what we should and how we should be engaging our community.
Sister Afaf, I had a question. Yes?
Who, me?
Yeah, I have a question for the.
Go ahead, Brother Mustapha, please.
Yes, so Senator Parker, I was glad to hear that, working with Umair Khan and other people, you already have some of these bills kind of just waiting for the right time for it to be pushed. As you mentioned earlier, sometimes you just have to get that right timing. And so I'm sort of reflecting on the fact that you had a foresight of having these things ready to go. I'm reflecting on what's happening right now in Portland and other cities where people are getting snatched off the street. Because this used to happen to the Muslim community. People used to get snatched right off the street, put in vans and sent for extraordinary rendition. And it would be, but nobody ever said anything. And now we have to deal with the consequence of not saying something before. So it's,
right.
Again, I'm glad to hear that you sort of were thinking about the consequences of things that would happen even before the state that we are in today. So my question is, maybe it's too big a question. What sort of piqued your interest in getting these bills going just for kind of like the right moment? What event or events got you to spawn that interest?
Again, it was a combination of things, right? And some of it was, again, some of my experiences in which, Mayor Bloomberg sicked the NYPD on me, and I had to go through a number of situations that I felt like I wasn't treated correctly by the police, right? And then simultaneously representing this large, Pakistani Muslim community where I was exactly hearing about some of the stories you're indicating, right? And right after 9/11, right, I got elected in 2002, took office in 2003. So that was right in the wake of 9/11. And so, you had, the FBI, Homeland Security, you had, the state police, you had everybody doing these investigations. And then by the time we got to around 2009, what we then saw was the Intelligence Bureau of the NYPD doing investigations in places like Jersey, right? Infiltrating mosques, right? And those of us who are familiar with things like COINTELPRO, right? And the kind of work that was done in the 60s against the Panthers and others, we understand how they operate, right? And then we even saw it here in New York, where you had police officers, I should say law enforcement, because they're not always police, but law enforcement infiltrating organizations and radicalizing the organizations, right? It wasn't even an inherent thing, but it was the people infiltrating it that were radicalizing the organizations and then making arrests. And so we did a number of things at that time. Again, at that time, it was Umwe Khan in my office who kind of was the sharp end of the sword, putting forward this legislation and looking at various opportunities and things that we thought were important in terms of creating some accountability and transparency in terms of the police department. At that time, we were primarily looking at the intelligence apparatus of the police and making sure there was some accountability around that. We still haven't gotten it the way I think that it needs to be, but I think these are some good starts. Now, my director of operations, Tamara Tucker, and my legislative director, Aaron Clark, are kind of collaborating to develop, again, we, I think, have like 10 or 12 additional bills that we've put forward. Again, everything from how do you do, conflict resolution without using police, to more training for police, to things like, qualified immunity for police as well. But we, and again, this stuff is not anti, and also have a bill that creates a residency requirement for NYPD, right? So that they have to live in the 5 boroughs. And again, this is something that I was thinking about and then got concretized in my mind because, again, conversations with Borough President Eric Adams and indicating 2 things. 1, we believe that we get police better when the folks come from our own communities. And 2, that these are good full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits. And we really should be creating a career path for people in our own communities to take these jobs. And we were just like very lucky. I mean, just like, I guess 2 weeks ago, the first Muslim became a captain in the police department, right? Like this is, he's at the 84th precinct. It's like,
that was the first South Asian Muslim. I believe we may have had a Muslim prior, but the first South Asian Muslim. But even then, the first Muslim, from my understanding, became captain just a couple of years ago too. And this is something the city always boasts about, right? How many Muslims they have in the force, but it sure took a long time for them to progress forward.
That's right. And again, we have to understand this. This is the largest numerical population of Muslims in the entire country here in New York. And why does it take this long for the Muslim community to be policed by other Muslims? And so I think that it's apparent about the fact that we essentially have allowed ourselves to be policed by an invading force of outsiders, people who are not from our community, not of our community, to police us. And so we really need to do some things and reimagine how policing has happened. And so those are the things that kind of got us to this place. And I really don't want to let this, one of my favorite axioms about politics is never let a good crisis go to waste. And certainly I don't want to let go to waste the hard work of the protesters and the people who are putting their lives on the line every single day, raising their voices and asking for police accountability and transparency. And I actually fundamentally believe that it will be to the benefit of the police, because most of the people doing the things that we don't like is a vast minority of the police population, and we need police officers. However, it has been demonstrated to us ad infinitum that the good police are either unwilling or unable to police their own folks. And so in absence of that, we must legislate processes that provide accountability for bad behavior amongst police officers.
I have 2 other questions in these last few moments, if you don't mind, and then we'll just wrap it up because of time. So Brother Lonnie, one of the questions that came in was, with the repeal of 58, how do you imagine that will help with regards to the kinds of cases you take on?
Well, I think the repeal of 58 will more immediately affect criminal prosecutions to begin with, all right, where you're able to reveal the personnel records and the disciplinary histories of police officers on certain cases, certain arrests. I can speak to that. I have a case in the Bronx that got interrupted because of the COVID, but I was able to get information from the prosecutor as to a prior time where this particular police officer testified in court and was found not credible by a judge. And just so happens to find out that it was the exact same type of case that I was defending. And I was able to use that very effectively to cross-examine this police officer as to his habits in terms of stopping people in cars, things of that nature. So I think it'll affect the criminal prosecution right away. Coupled with that, later on, I think in the civil arena, if you have an instance where, again, you're suing for a false arrest, if you're able to determine that this particular police officer has 6 prior complaints for a false arrest, that may be something that could even, if you get the right judge, defeat qualified immunity. Mm-hmm. If you get the right judge and you make the argument that, okay, this particular police officer has a history of falsely arresting people and violating their rights, that may convince a judge, again, even if qualified immunity still exists, to not allow that police officer to have qualified immunity. So it would be a big help in both arenas.
And just so that everybody understands this, when we look at the case of Eric Garner in Staten Island, right, 6 years ago, and the arrest and then lack of prosecution of Officer Pantaleo, the reason why you couldn't get a grand jury to indict him was because of 50A. And so you couldn't see past bad acts because his personnel record was sealed. And so everything, what we did with repealing 50A, it wasn't a complete repeal, it was a partial repeal, just to be able to look at the things that are necessary to add to a prosecution in the case that we get officers who are acting inappropriately, with the citizens, right? And had 50A been repealed, then we believe that we would have gotten an indictment and then ultimately a prosecution of Officer Pantaleo.
Former Officer Pantaleo.
Former Officer Pantaleo. But it should have took 6 years to get partial justice. And by the way, they never even prosecuted the other cops that stood there and watched it and engaged in the death of Eric Garner, because former Officer Pantaleo wasn't the only one who was engaged in that, right?
You're mute.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, I think that goes back to the expectations that Brother Lonnie was talking about in terms of having to realistically speak with his clients and say it's going to be a bumpy road. It's not really the expectations that you have, because there are all these hurdles that you have to jump through for what we conceive is a right, especially in the United States, and that is the right to seek recourse for justice, right? And I think Senator Parker, one of the last questions that we want to address here, and somebody asked, is how do your constituents, or how does the public in general go about supporting this bill for ending qualified immunity?
Well, yeah, that I've been waiting. I only came on here for that question, so thank you whoever asked it. The first thing is that everybody should reach out. If you live in the state of New York, you should reach out to your local elected officials, particularly those in the state, in the state Senate and the state Assembly, and tell them to become co-sponsors of this bill, right? And so tell them to co-sponsor the Parker Walker qualified immunity bill. That's the first thing. Second thing is, if you belong to organizations, right, and like CAIR or anybody else, you should write official memos of support for that legislation, right? And if you have a coalition, the coalition should write a letter, but each member of the coalition should write a memo as well on their own letterhead and send it into the Senate. It can go to me, or it can go directly to the Senate or the Assembly, just indicating your support for this legislation. You can never have too many memos of support from organizations. And then lastly, we need to be involved in public discourse. Obviously, this conversation is helpful. Those of you, if you have media contacts, getting people to write stories about qualified immunity, you should get people to interview Sister Nasher and Brother Lonnie Hart and Brother Mustapha, and have them get on the record. Maybe even if the heads of some of your organizations get together and write an op-ed. I've been talking a lot with Brother Omar Mohammadi about this. He's one of the people who lit a fire under me to make sure this legislation got in. But if you have your organizations write op-eds, in politics in New York State, the New York Times editorial board is the holy grail. You get them to write something about the fact that we need to have qualified immunity, the next week we'll pass the bill. I'm telling you, right? Like that's it, right? And so it's that level of conversations. But even on the community level, we need to be talking to our communities at our community meetings, block association meetings, tenant association meetings, the mosque, the temple, the synagogues. We all need to be having these conversations about what this means and a movement. In the same way there was mass conversation about 50A, which is part of how 50A got done. If there's a mass conversations about qualified immunity, it will create the environment in which we can pass legislation.
Okay, I think, Brother Mustapha, unless you have any pressing questions, it's almost time for prayer. So we're going to want to wrap it up. Are you good?
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm glad that Senator Parker, you gave a shout out to our board member, Brother Omar Mohammadi, who I know is very invested in this and many other civil rights issues and has been serving the community as well. He's been wrapped up in legal matters really for especially today. And so as much as I wanted to hear his voice, we know he's serving the community and serving the clients in the best way that he knows how, and that is by advocating for them. And Brother Lonnie, I just want to really thank you and Senator Parker, Brother Mustapha, Brother Ali in the background, Sister Haneen, who's been putting in all the effort to make sure this happens seamlessly, and to everyone who's participated, including those who watch the program and ask these important questions. It involves engagement. That's where this all starts. As Senator Parker said, we have to be engaged as public, as members and citizens, through our votes, through public pressure, and through voicing those opinions to make sure that those who are elected and have promised to serve us, serve our interests well, right? That is what it means to be a constituent. That is what it means to be an engaged American. And so we thank all of you for engaging with us tonight, and we really appreciate your time. I'll allow each of our speakers, if you want to say any one lasting thing. I do want to say, Senator Parker, you brought up that CLE thing with the police officers. I need you to promise publicly that if that ever happens, you got to make sure that the ones that are doing trainings involve people who look like me and Brother Mustapha and Brother Lonnie. That's really important, because training, is only as good as the trainer, right?
Agree. You have that promise.
All right, then I'll allow each of you.
We'll get the bill passed.
Yes. Oh, you sound like, I can't believe you said that right there. Okay. Taking advantage of the moment in the crisis. Got you. All right. But again, I really do thank you. If there are any last minute remarks, we'll make them now. And if not, we'll bid everyone a good evening and a final note of appreciation. Brother Lonnie, anything that you want to say?
No, just, I'm very proud to have been asked to participate in this panel this evening. It's a terrific conversation. And like I said, just everyone keep fighting the good fight. And as I said before, elections matter, and we have a huge one coming up in November. So everyone, please stay engaged. That's
right. And Senator Parker.
One, again, just thank you for including me in this conversation, and it's really been an honor. And I want to encourage everybody who's listening to reach out to your state legislators and to your local city council people and others. We really do want to hear from people like yourselves, and and wherever you live, there are people who are responsive to you. So make sure you reach out to us. Let us know what your wishes and desires are, because we're here for you. And so so we want to set up a call with this group just to have a conversation about police reform, or a working group conversation about qualified immunity. I'm available to do that, and I'm sure many of my other colleagues are interested in joining that conversation.
Thank you so much for making yourself available like that. Brother Mustapha.
Oh, no final words. Thank you.
Okay, and I just again want to thank all of you for your time and your consideration. And again, keep fighting for your clients, your constituents. We'll keep doing the advocacy from our side, and let's look forward to a better tomorrow, inshallah.
Have
a good night. And Assalamu alaikum.
Good night.